Okay, welcome to another episode of Black Representation in the Curriculum, where we have conversations about teaching, culture, equity, and belonging. Today, I'm thrilled to have our guest today, Dr. Alexis Riley. uh, so, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Riley and I have known each other for some time
Hmm.
and been involved in, some collaborations. And so, I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you on a different level.
Yeah, great.
So welcome, and why don't we start with you introducing yourself?
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, my name's Alexis Riley. Things people want to hear. I'm a assistant professor at NYU Steinhardt Teaching and Learning. My PhD is in science education. Some things about myself. I'm from Los Angeles, but I've lived in New York since 2011, so I know a couple of things or two about this beautiful place I call home. And my work centers the legacy, innovations, and healing of Black women science teachers.
Awesome. Legacies, innovations, and healing of Black. Wow. That's a
That's my elevator pitch.
wow. Legacies. Uh,
Innovations and healing.
since I'm so curious about this, I wanted to delve more into your journey, but I am so curious since you brought that up.
Okay.
That's I can't let that go.
Okay. Yeah, tell me more.
So what do you mean by legacies,
So the
innovations? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the legacy piece is really engaging in the archival work. So the doctoral work, and I've continued on with trying to make sense of what have been the pedagogical pursuits of Black women teachers in this country since its inception, and then trying to figure out in what ways those pursuits resonate with Black women science teachers today. So really considering pedagogical frameworks such as womanist pedagogy, which made sense of how exemplary Black women teachers engaged in teaching, their ideology about the teaching, how they may have shifted the curriculum, but bringing that legacy, that long storied narrative about what we have always brought to the field of education, trying to bring that to Black women science teachers and sort of asking them, in what ways does this fit, not fit? Does this feel like something that you intended to do, something that you are doing in your classroom? Just to really allow for and help us make sense of, do we feel like we are in this legacy of what Black women teachers have always done in America in terms of how we
Mm-hmm.
have taught Black children in particular, of course. And then there's also, of course, so that piece is more so of like really trying to allow for Black women science teachers to consider themselves within this long legacy. But then even from there, going through in the archives to try to really hunt for more narratives that talk about how Black teachers have been engaged in more humanizing and affirming ways of considering what science is and is not, and the ways that understanding that science can help us engage in more community-based efforts to ensure that we are using science for our community or for the benefit of others. It's the legacy piece, excuse me, and then the
Mm-hmm.
innovations piece is more so about the current. In my work with talking with Black women science teachers, I began to understand that we are very innovative in the ways that we consider how to use frameworks like culturally relevant pedagogy
Mm-hmm.
in our science classrooms. And we're innovative in that our peers, so maybe at our school sites, are not as willing to engage in these sort of pedagogical pursuits. So really trying to make sense of what is it, one piece of the work is, or that's the healing piece. So in terms of innovations, it's like, what are those curricular shifts, those ideological shifts that we bring to science education that maybe is not how we were taught science, but it's how we envision science could be, breath, like the way we could breathe, smell, and taste science, and bring it back to the classroom. So that innovations piece is trying to be held within the framework entitled Historically Relevant Science Pedagogy for what
Mm-hmm.
those innovations have felt like and what they could look like in offering to the larger field. And then the healing piece is all of that work is very exhausting. That work is exhausting. That work can
Very.
be siloing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, because that work can be siloing, what might it look like for us to come together to one, acknowledge what it feels like, to two, really come together in affinity, and to laugh with each other, to vent with one another, to build with one another, and to try to make sense of like if there were parts of us that we negotiated in order to become Black women science teachers and to survive in our classrooms or to survive outside of our classrooms, how can we put those puzzle pieces together? How could learning this history help us look in the mirror and have some actual, some fortitude about ourselves or some honor about ourselves? Or what
Mm-hmm.
are some ways that we could practice self-healing techniques in sister circles together? What are ways of just being in that space and just having a little moment with one another? How does that allow us just to have have a moment of peace, right? So
Right.
that's the healing piece. So the legacy is thinking about the historical narratives, the historical pursuits, and teaching children the innovations is what that might look like in some more tangible ways today, especially given that politically we've always been teetering on what's happening in the past, but really trying to make sense of what's happening in the current. And then the healing is really trying to bring us together and focus on the human that is the Black woman science teacher. How can we ensure that she also has some space to breathe and to decide if she wants to do this or not, but to do that with amongst affinity spaces with Black women science teachers.
Wow. Wow, such important work. Now, I think about, even the legacy aspect. I think it'll be very difficult for many to grasp that we do have a legacy. But it's amazing delving more and more to the history, how rich that legacy out, how much so much of it is left out.
Mm,
And that legacy, it's really, I'm intentionally saying this because that legacy is really important for everyone to know
mhm,
because you're not going to find out the truth without truly understanding that legacy
mhm,
because that legacy has been intentionally buried, right? That legacy has been intentionally buried because we're a society that's always favored symbolism above the truth.
mhm.
And truth only matters when it becomes convenient for it to matter. And so that's definitely very, very important work there.
Yeah.
I do want to backtrack
Okay.
because, in talking about all of this and legacy, I'm so curious about what led you here before I want to delve into some of your research. But what led you here? I know that we had talked briefly about you being a first gen college. Talk about your journey that you think has influenced you choosing this direction
Yeah.
in your research.
With the legacy piece. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
To your point, yes, I am a first gen college student, which means, I'm a girl from South Central Los Angeles, which also means that college for me, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, the whole thing was like, you go to college. Like, you're going to be the one to go do it. And I was like, all right, great. Oh, I went and I did, and, I worked really hard. And then I went and did the college thing. But then it also means like, I achieved my life dream at 22. So
Right.
I didn't know what else. They didn't give a roadmap after that. They just said, go to college. And I said, boom, bam, got it. And
We
honestly,
got the
I'm
rest.
sure my family and parents would have been just fine with just like, "Oh, okay, well, thanks for doing the thing, now go live a happy life." But I didn't know what to do after college.
Hmm.
So, and I didn't have a plan because no one was telling me what to do. There we go. There was this lady walking around talking about Teach for America. So then I said, "Oh, what's that?" Because I also didn't know what a master's was. I sincerely didn't
Hmm.
understand what a master's degree, what the function of it was.
Hmm.
So long story short, she was walking around saying, if you don't know what you want to do, then you take some time off. Take some time off and do this thing. And so I did not apply to grad schools, I don't think, because I didn't know what I was going to apply in because I didn't know what it meant. There we go. So
Hmm.
I applied to Teach for America. So it was either going to be Teach for America or move back to Los Angeles, and we weren't going to do that. So we got into Teach for America, but the goal was to move to New York. All this to say, um, I taught middle school science in Harlem, and
Hmm.
I did that for 4 years, and there's a lot of wonderful stories I can talk about that. But in
Hmm.
terms of how it got me to the legacy piece, the way that I taught, so my first year of teaching in Harlem, I taught social studies, and that's what I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach history. And
Hmm.
the way that I taught history was, um, the parents appreciated it, the students appreciated it. We were very, very intense about what it meant for us to be in Harlem in a historical moment, what it meant for the history of New York for us to be there, and then what it
Hmm.
meant for us to be either Black American students, African American students, in that space, and to consider the legacy of what New York State was, especially considering the history of enslavement, considering the
Hmm.
history of Native American folks in the place.
Wow.
So that meant we did things like going to the African burial grounds that are here in New York. We really
Mm.
considered narratives of Christopher Columbus and what does it mean to have truth? Who gets to decide whose truth is warranted, especially for seventh graders. I taught seventh grade, and allowing them to make sense of that. We read a fourth
Hmm.
grade version of Christopher Columbus versus Howard Zinn's people's history, and then they were like, "Well, fourth graders, they're too young to learn all of that terrible stuff. Like we should learn, we're old enough to learn this stuff, and we should hear the history of people who were also oppressed." And I said, "Oh, okay, that's really beautiful. I'm so glad you think that. All right, so let's open up your textbook, your seventh grade textbook, and let's see what the state has decided that you are warranting in terms of truth." So they were pissed off because they learned some things about what the state believed that they should learn about their history or about the history of the state. So anyway, I
Mhm.
provide that example to name. Eventually, I was tasked with teaching middle school science, but I had already built this reputation for myself and with the families and community that I was in service of
Mhm.
teaching more of a, let's say, critically conscious course. So I didn't know how I was going to do that with science. To clarify, I was a science girl in high school and in college, but I had not considered what that might mean.
Mhm.
And I took a long time to figure out what that might mean. And then we took more of a health equity spin to all of our units in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade science for the 3 years
Mm.
I was there. Now, we can zoom forward, and I'm in a doctoral program at TC, at Teachers College, Columbia University, getting a
Mhm.
PhD in science education. And I'm trying to make sense of what I want to research. And that was taking me down this realm about Black women teachers.
Mhm.
And in that moment is when I learned about womanist pedagogy, either through like a Google Scholar search or maybe my advisor was like, read this thing. I don't remember. But I do remember when reading, feeling this huge moment of a complex emotion of like concern that I had never heard of this thing,
Mm.
honored that someone had written down the legacies of Black women teachers, but then also feeling very heard and seen and valued because the things that I was trying to do as a more novice baby teacher were the things I
Mm.
was seeing on this page. And so that sort of like spiritual aha, that's sort of just like, oh my goodness, wait, I'm not crazy. With the things I was trying to do, other people have been trying to do in education all this time.
Mhm.
Um, and, it's worthy to be named. When I was doing those things in my Harlem teaching experience, I wasn't necessarily in a community of like, let me test this out with my peers or talk through the ways that I'm trying to shift this curriculum. That's
Mhm.
essentially was my breakfast, lunch, and dinner, was just trying to make sense of how can I create a curriculum that is worthy of my community and makes me feel like I am serving them in a way that they would want. And all of that, while purpose driven and exciting, still exhausting, and again, still siloing. So there was this moment
Mhm.
of like reading about womanist pedagogy and reading about this legacy that really felt like a big hug and sort of like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. And the things that
Mhm.
I'm trying to do are worthy of being expressed and talked about and
Yeah.
continued. And so that
Wow.
sort of sparked this idea, because then that took me on this whole other rabbit hole of like, well, if I'm having this huge, like, ready to cry moment in my office, what would happen if I brought that to other Black women science teachers? Would they have
Mm.
a similar experience?
Yeah.
So, that ended up being a part of my doctoral studies, and from there, it's really spread its wings into getting even further into the archives to make sense of, very specifically, how do Black women teachers consider their content expertise in science and also engage in these same practices
Mhm.
of the three tenets of womanist pedagogy, which is uh, embrace of the maternal, political clarity, and ethic of risk. Like, what are ways that we do that? But in particular, in science teaching and learning, especially given that science teaching and learning attempts to pretend like it is objective and politically neutral. And so, because of that very stark opposing nature, what are
Yeah.
ways that we contend?
Right. Now you said the three things you focus on is how to embrace the maternal. What are the other two?
Embrace of the maternal is the first one, political clarity is the second, and ethic of risk is the third.
Ethic of
And
risk.
that's written from Tamara Babouf Lafanda, and I really hope I am pronouncing her name correctly because this is recorded. So that's great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Goodness. You said so much there. What do you think people need to know? What do you think they need to know? Is there any advice what advice can you offer in terms of the significance of being that first gen and your success because you've been successful repeatedly as
Mhm.
a first gen and
Well, like, what do institutions need to know about first gen
like
college
what
students?
concerns are warranted, what concerns are not warranted.
Mhm.
Because do you in being a first gen college student, did you think it was an additional struggle for you
Mhm.
maybe things you didn't know that maybe you saw friends who were not first gen?
Mm.
Like, what are some challenges you had to navigate?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The concerns or the things folks need to know are typically classed. In that I in college had my first semester. My parents asked me not to get a job, and I said, "Okay, sure, I won't get a job." Um, but then I had 86 cents to my name. So we had to get a job. So then we applied for 2 jobs and we got 2 jobs. So we got 2
Mhm,
jobs. And so it depends on the school year, but I either had 2, you know, work study jobs. So, jobs on campus
mhm,
or 3 at a time. And
mm,
so my college classmates, I think at some point called me Alexis with the jobs. I'm still considered Alexis with the jobs amongst my friends, for reasons I won't talk about with a recording. But I'm always trying to figure out how to ensure that my income is helping with the baggage that comes along. So,
mm,
instance, so to try to answer in terms of a navigation question, things I had to navigate that my peers did not have to navigate was time management or understanding what my courses required of me versus what my job required of me, and then really trying to be a person who got sleep,
mm.
and really trying to figure out whatever that meant. And also trying to be a 19-year-old girl, trying to have fun at college because apparently that's a part of the deal too. So that would have been nice. Woo. So I think the things that I was attempting to navigate, that my peers didn't was it was never only going to be about going to class. And I am a big nerd. I love to learn. I want to do the
Mhm,
readings. I want to do whatever. But I had to
mhm,
truly figure out how to balance. So I remember in, like, college, I learned my professors weren't real, like, teachers. They talked about what they wanted you to know in class.
mhm,
So if I had 50 minutes to dedicate my beautiful brain to learning a thing, it
mhm,
may not have been reading outside of class because we ain't got time for that because we are at work, right? So, like, the professor's gonna talk about what he wants you to know on that test. So let me like my so that's where I got really intense with note taking then. I wish
mhm.
I wonder if they're in my mom's house. Like, I have these big binders of all these notes I took, and so, like,
Yeah.
it became my bread and butter, but then trying to navigate, like, I was a security guard, I was a barista, and depends on the year, I was, undergraduate advisor for my degree or, like, a student, like, support well, no, I know what these words are now because I support people.
Mhm,
Undergraduate, support person, something like
mhm,
transcribes or, like, looking at bibliographies and stuff. So
mhm,
okay, so financially, I was trying to navigate whatever student loans were and signing away my life at that moment, but also trying to go to work. So I was going
mhm,
to work and then trying to go to class and knowing that grades matter, but didn't know where they were going to lead me.
mhm,
And then also I did a lot of, trying to talk to professors or grad students at the time. I
mhm,
knew I didn't understand what was coming next, but I also knew I didn't understand the purpose of, like, what people do with these degrees. So I spent
mhm,
some time, like, asking people to go to coffee or if I worked for them, like, "What do you do in your job?" That kinda thing.
mhm.
Where my peers, maybe they knew things I didn't know. So I just asked lots of questions.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
so and, in my adult relationships now, I hear my friends talk about their college experiences, and they're just things that they didn't have to consider, especially when it comes to finances or where they could, like, take a chill moment of, like, "Oh, when I'm done, I know that if things don't work out, I have feet to land. I can land on my feet with
Mhm,
no ground, over here." So we had to figure it out.
mhm.
I think
Wow.
that's my answer to your question.
Wow. Yeah, the finances thing I can completely understand and relate to.
Yeah.
Think, growing up poor, we're always concerned about the finances. I remember one day, and I think I wrote about that in my book. I don't remember. I remember one day that, um, I was out of money, and at Barnard we had this emergency fund thing, and I remember I borrowed $500, and I was so focused on paying it back
Mhm,
because owing someone $500 seemed like, that's one thing you don't do. You don't want to owe or be indebted.
mhm,
And I think to my detriment, I worked myself just to pay off that $500. And I remember getting rid of that promissory note, and it was, um, and it's amazing. We really need to teach our kids about money and how to think about money,
Well,
in
yeah.
a healthy way.
Mhm.
S- uh, you know, wow, yeah. So it just reminded me of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think and to your point, I think poor folks know about money.
Mm-hmm.
We know what it is to not have it. We know what it is to have
Yeah.
it. But I also like in terms of, my understanding of the more original question is, like, institutions are not willing to support in a way that allows for us to have a healthy relationship with money because
Mm-hmm.
it always feels like, or it always is some version of a deficit. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
I don't know that me learning more about money would have helped me not have it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you learn about it, right? I mean, there are
Mhm,
things that I'm thinking now that I have a son, with things that I want to show him about it. And even with me
mhm,
trying to take, life's goals to the next level, realizing I need to unlearn some ways of thinking about it that was based
mhm,
on perhaps my own desperation, right? And things I need to let go of. But you mentioned that one of the ways you've integrated your work with science is looking at health equity. Been one of the things that has been on my mind lately because I really do believe that we need to urgently really have more Black doctors.
mhm,
Because it's interesting. I'm gonna apply some of what I've learned in creating my book, to what I believe is not only happening now and it'll continue happening more and more. Usually, I don't say these things before they happen, at the risk of sounding crazy, but I think when you hit a certain age, you don't really care.
mhm,
And I think I'm at that age. But I think that, from looking at individual anecdotes, the situation will get worse for us, in terms of the health disparities, because the more we report these numbers, I think they have two effects. For those who want to make sure they continue to exist, there's going to be a push on the individual level to make sure that we don't have doctors and that, Black people don't become doctors.
mhm,
Um, and I think we're gonna see that compounded more and more, into what it means, into more deaths for us. And it's going to compound more and more because people often don't associate individual acts of, let's just say, hampering someone from going to med school or hampering someone who is in, um, residency learning about med school. People don't see that as killing Black people, right?
mhm,
But if you have that happening a million times, it's not like, not well, I don't know that they could say there's a million of us in med school. But let's just say if that happens a million times because repeatedly, and then we drop out. I think that that's going to get worse over time.
mhm.
I bring that up because I know we talked about medical college, and you're going to a magnet school. Was that something you were interested in, becoming a doctor?
Yeah.
I'm so curious about that journey and goal and what changed for you.
Mm. Yeah, so I went to King Drew Medical Magnet High School, and I graduated in '07. So, yes, choosing which high school that I was going to go to, I remember being a very huge part of my identity as a middle schooler and trying to figure out which high school was gonna get me where I wanted to go. Because again,
Mm-hmm.
everyone was saying, "You gotta go to college." And, depends on the year, I believe if you ask middle school me, I wanted to be a cardiologist. I'm fairly certain that's what I used to say. And
Mm-hmm.
then the high school me wanted to be a forensic pathologist. I know that
A
that's
what?
forensic pathologist.
Okay.
So, King Drew Medical Magnet School is in Compton, California. It was founded in the 1980s, and it is a creation. It is a child of Drew Medical School, which also is down the street,
Mm-hmm.
from King Drew Medical Magnet. And I don't know how many magnet schools are in LAUSD, but it is one
Mm-hmm.
of from what I remember about it, and even in my conversations now, one of the few magnet schools of the time, or that exist now in Los Angeles Unified School District. So, um, I can't remember what legal or not legal ways we got me into that school. I do kn This is not your question, let me stop telling on myself. So the big thinking there was Alexis likes science, Alexis wants to be a doctor, Alexis wants to go to a school that's going to get her to college. Let's
Mhm.
get her into this school. That school is innovative and amazing and should be celebrated because of its hospital program in particular.
Mm.
Junior year, my friends will say, me and memory is not are not friends. I don't remember all the details, but from what I do remember, junior year, we get assigned to a hospital.
Mm.
And at the time when I first started, we were at King Hospital across the street, which no longer exists with that name or with those people in
Mm.
charge of it. But I
Mhm.
got to firsthand be I think they call it candy striper because it's not an intern, but it's like
Mm.
I followed a nurse, but I followed a PCP for
Mhm.
a couple of months. We went, I think, 2 or 3 times a week, and we went into the hospital.
Hmm.
And then I especially asked, because I knew I wanted to be a forensic pathologist, I asked for them to open up their morgue for me
Mm.
to intern at the morgue. And so
Wow.
I know that I did that for 8 weeks, and I was
Okay.
fascinated by it. I was like, "Oh, this is what I wanna do." 15-year-old, 16-year-old Alexis had some things going on, so I really wanted to be a forensic pathologist. And then I know when King Hospital was having the controversies that led to its closing, we started to be bused over to UCLA, and then I was an intern. I followed a nurse all day. Like,
Mm.
it was very, very intense, and they entrusted me to do things I don't know what's on the King Drew, requirement list. I was pulling things out of humans. There were code blues. I knew the codes. I knew how to move. I was asked to do things I don't know that I was supposed to be in there doing because I was in the ICU at
Mhm.
UCLA. And I don't remember if I went anywhere after that, so maybe I was only at the ICU with UCLA.
Mm.
So that allowed for us in that program and also, King Drew Medical Magnet has a high amount of AP courses. So we also took those.
Mm.
We have a wonderful humanities department as well. So we weren't teetered off and only to one area. So it was a very
Mhm.
balanced place as well. Um, so when it got time for we had and have a very amazing college counselor in Miss Golden who had these programs to allow for folks to make sense of what college could be for them but also to counsel our peers, which allow for
Mhm.
me as somebody in that position to better
Mhm.
understand the options, especially in California, of
Mhm.
what college could be. Okay, so I was a chemistry major. I was a chemistry girl. I did well in chemistry. I did well in AP Chem. Um,
Mhm.
and we got into college as a chemistry major. The question is why did I not get an MD?
What made you switch out of, I'm guessing, were you pre-med in college?
No, I was a chemistry major. So
Oh, okay.
let's see. We didn't make it far with chemistry because one, I went to take the course and it was over enrolled.
Mhm.
Walked in, there was kids sitting on the floor, and I said, "Why they sitting on the floor? I don't know that I want to do that." And then I chose not to take that course. I said I would take it in spring. But even with that, I remember going to my first year. We had What's the quick version of this story or the parts that I remember? I
Mhm.
know that we had these like freshman courses to better help you understand the brevity at which you could
Mhm.
engage in any
Make choices.
your
Mhm.
choices that you had. And I remember having a moment to myself and asking myself if I still wanted to have a definitive answer at the end of the day with my degree.
Mhm.
And maybe I took an anthro course. I think that's what it was. Cause yeah, I think first semester I took an anthropology course, and the way that they got to ask questions felt more interesting than what I was doing as an AP chemistry person. So I remember saying to
Uh,
myself, "I'm not so sure that I want there to always be an answer to the questions that I'm asking." And I was
mhm.
excited by this idea of not having the answers immediately at my feet, in the way that chemistry was
Mm,
presented to me as if
right.
we were just learning about the answers that someone
One
else.
fact and answer, yeah.
So, um, I thought about anthropology. I thought about political science.
Mhm.
Was still taking science courses, and
Mhm.
then I thought about sociology. So that's how I got out of chemistry major.
Mm. What did
Yeah,
you end up majoring in?
sociology. I'm a
Oh,
sociologist.
oh, awesome. Wow, okay.
Mhm.
But, I want to switch gears and talk about some of your research. Talk about what you focus on and how you frame your work and why.
Yeah, I use critical race theory and Black feminist thought to help me make sense of my worldview and the possibilities and purposes of what my research can be.
Mhm,
Um, Black feminist theory, despite being a sociologist, Black feminist theory is not something that I was trained to understand until my doctoral program, and I, of course,
mhm,
had to learn about critical race theory by that point. Um, I say, of course, in that it's not, it felt like something that you were making sense of as more of a as a doctoral student versus like
mhm.
as a teacher. So,
Okay.
yes, I use Black feminist theory to help me make sense of back to history, Black feminist theory, of course, is a standpoint theory that helps us understand the ways in which Black women experience myriads or different systems of oppression, but also how we engage with each other, both on the everyday level, on the intellectual level, of course, in the merger of both, and the ways that either Black women intellectuals or Black women everyday folks navigate different systems of oppression all at once. And also the ways that those experiences or the ways that that standpoint can also be contrary. We are of course not a monolith. So it
Mhm,
allows for Black feminist theory allows for us to try to make sense of what it is to navigate this place in particular, being the United States, but then also because of the I would say maybe the purposes of Black feminist theory, it also can allow for more of a transcontinental way of seeing how Black women throughout, no matter where they are on this earth, the ways that
mhm,
we consider a humanistic view. Humanistic view meaning how do we fight for justice for all people?
mhm,
And you know, so Black feminist theory, of course, is different than feminist theory in that it is not a single axis issue, really trying
mm,
to make sense of or trying to behold the various ways that different systems of oppression impact all of us,
mhm.
refusing to ignore the multiple cells that we bring to a space.
Um, but you brought up a couple things in terms of how you focus on it as opposed to just feminist theories.
Mhm,
Um, why is that I mean, and you talked about the fact that it gives different perspectives, but shed light on one, not only why that's important, um, and not only why that will be important for you, but
mhm.
how do you think it allows you to make a different interpretation than, let's just say, someone who's just doing a feminist theory might? Like, what would be some good reasons that, researchers um, can use this as an approach to open up their eyes to
Mhm.
things that maybe other approaches might not?
And so in the 1970s, there, of course, were lots of different people led movements that were, or social movements that were trying to both be vocal about systems of oppression, but also to engage in change management on a political level, on an everyday level, on a social level of how we treat each other and how we treat people. So, of course, you can have the queer social movements, you can have feminist social movements, and you can have race social movements.
Mm,
Those social movements being more single access social movements mean that they could ignore folks who live in, of course, the intersection of those. Well, a feminist movement, independent of the degree of that feminist movement, but if you can talk about what some consider to be the second wave of feminism, white women
mhm,
were really the white women were really trying to figure out as leaders of that feminist movement or the faces of that feminist movement, they were trying to figure out how to work against sexism. So sexism for them was some version of we should be paid the same or allowed to open up an account. We should be allowed to vote, depends on what wave we're thinking about, and we should be allowed to make choices in our households that are focused on them, right? And those are gendered issues that make sense and should have absolutely been fought for. But alone, they allow for only white women to better elevate whatever their position is.
Mhm.
So Black women in those spaces were also trying to bring light to queer social movements, to race social movements, and feminist movements or feminist leaders of the time because their vision was on themselves or because their vision was single focused. They had little room for considering other ideologies that were not
Mhm.
about this one thing. And of
Right.
course, Black folks as a culture, we are not here. We don't have the luxury of only focusing on this one thing. It is not
Right.
how we are as communal people. It is not how we are in terms of how policies impact us.
Mhm.
And so, so this feminist movement of the 1970s did not allow for in particular Black women or Black queer women to have the space to consider all the ways that things needed to change and for the betterment of them and everyone else. Uh,
Mhm.
within that same time, of course, these Black women are in these spaces, in these more feminist spaces. But as Audre Lorde says, Black feminism is not white feminism in blackface. Black women, Black feminists needed to figure out what is our actual ideology, what are ways that we are realizing either political forces are acting upon us, the ways in which race or social and economic
Mhm.
forces are acting upon us, and what
Absolutely.
might that mean for who we are as everyday people and as Black intellectuals, and the gifts we want to give the world so they can better see
Mhm.
what it is to be from here in our experience. Um,
Right.
it's true from for the queer movement, it was being led by Black, queer gay men, although,
Mhm.
of course, there were Black and brown trans folks, Black and brown queer folks who were leading those movements and actually physically harmed, in order
Mhm.
to social movements. So, um so those folks come together, and let's say in the mid to late 70s, to either write about what's going on, to create fiction about what's going on, to create journal articles, to talk to the people, to organize, but that requiring that they don't have to take away some of their puzzle pieces in order to be in that space.
Mm.
Those are some of the cruxes of Black feminist theory. But of course, that's just a moment. Black women have always engaged in these practices, and that's one of the
Mhm.
wonderful gifts that
Wow.
Bill Collins gave us, is really figuring out, how was Anna Julia Cooper engaging in this back in the 1800s? Like, this is not just one movement, but what are ways in which Black women have always considered who they are in the world and what that might mean for other social movements and the social movements that directly impact us.
Wow.
I'm trying to look for I was realizing
Yeah,
what I had
that's
to do
amazing.
Black feminist theory is, words of
No.
fire, but yeah.
Wow, I appreciate you putting that in perspective. I think it's an important perspective people need to know. I remember when I was a teacher, well, full time, I'm still a teacher, but when I was in the K-12 space, I remember making a similar choice you did. You know, you chose to go to Harlem. I had chosen to go to the Bronx, and I had chosen to um, stay with predominantly minority students at the time when I had moved to New Jersey as well. I remember peers in the field repeatedly, making comments about, well, you have a doctorate, you can go anywhere, you can go to that school. And they always pointed out predominantly white schools as places that they thought, I would want to go
Mhm,
as a doctorate. Um, which was not the case because we always had to, well, because I didn't want to. I mean, you want to teach people like yourself. And I don't think that's clearly understood that you want to, that you also considered yourself as equally important. And so that's also why I ask you those questions because, um, over the years, I've come to see it's important to spell it out.
mhm,
Especially when it comes to, you also said you focus on critical race theory. I'd love to touch on that if that's
mhm,
okay.
yeah,
And mainly because my work has a lot of implications for critical race theory, even though I didn't use it,
mhm,
even though I never used it. And one of the reasons I didn't was because as I was reading through it, I saw how easy it was to misunderstand it because you don't have that worldview. I'm using, the term you use, you talk about worldview and perspective. You don't have the worldview or perspective to embrace the particulars of that framework. So I spent a lot of my time focusing on the particulars and truly understanding um, what would be those particulars? And I spent a lot of times looking at evidence where people actually opposed it and why. What was their opposition? So I want to talk about this because I think that we see it more in action now, right? In a way that people can actually understand what it is and why now more than I believe, now more than they ever would have before our time now. So,
Mhm.
what, just, say what you want to say about it in terms of what it is and why you used
Yeah.
it and how you used it and things like that. And,
Yeah, I
hmm
think, critical race theory has done an amazing job, or critical race theorists, especially those who are writing in the late '80s and early '90s, have done a really amazing job of figuring out how to make, what some folks might pretend is complicated pretty plain, in
hmm
that one of the, tenets, of course, of critical race theory is counter storytelling, and I think that I don't think that folks don't, understand what critical race theory is, especially if you are a Black person in this country, because you experience one of the first things that Black critical race theorists help us to see, which is that racism is embedded in the fabric of this country. They didn't necessarily need to have, there didn't need to be pamphlets passed out to Black folks to understand that piece.
hmm
The thing that, I found when I was a doctoral student learning about critical race theory that was pretty poignant was I was learning about these tenets of critical race theory, but then when I was understanding the definitions or the ways they work in the world or the ways that they work in particular in education, I was like, well, yeah, that's called my lived experience. My
hmm
grandfather could talk about this thing. My grandmother, my aunts
Right.
were talking about this thing. They just weren't using these vocabulary words because those vocabulary words don't help them solve the problem. They're trying to solve the problem. We're too busy, being oppressed to talk about the oppression. And I say
Uh-huh.
that to say, critical race theorists, I haven't sat with the originators of them, but I imagine some of their main purposes was to make plain what law folks have tried to complicate within how they make certain decisions. So let's make really plain how racism works in this world. Let's make plain why you need counter storytelling in order to elevate the experience of those who actually are experiencing this thing in the ways that others are privileged because of this thing, and that
Mhm.
is not neutral. Making plain how myth of meritocracy is embedded throughout our everyday conversations, either a political figure speaking at us or making sense of who we are in these academic spaces or in our jobs at the cleaners, right? So, like, how does a myth, or thinking particular about college, how does a myth of meritocracy operate? So, we might experience myth of meritocracy, what my peers were doing versus what I was doing, and having to work for in terms of my merit, but not being given certain things because of that merit, right?
Mhm.
And like that
Yeah.
not existing. And knowing, because of the household that I was raised in, that that was not necessarily a game that I needed to play or was ever going to win. So I think that critical race theorists have done an excellent job of explaining how this country works from a law standpoint, and then folks like Gloria Laston Billings have helped us better understand how that also works within education.
Mhm.
But in terms of science, the folks that I think have spoken super plainly, about how this works in science education have been scholars like Terrell Morton and my forever advisor, Dr. Felicia Mensa, to really help
Mhm.
us make sense of property value in science and how that culture infiltrates, science throughout, and impacts who is excluded from science and who has the
Mhm.
privileges of being able to use it, and to have a science identity. So, I think that's my response.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you okay, before I ask you this question, it's amazing because you talked about counter storytelling, and that's one of the things that struck me, when I was doing my doctoral work. I heard some criticisms related to oh, where they want to create counter narratives or counter stories
Mhm.
and I so it really kept my wheels turning a lot because it made it look as if the goal to create counter stories was exceptional, right? And so that's also what led me down the road of trying to understand, narratives and how it shapes ideas. And it's really brought me full circle to really understanding that one of the the power of the counter story
Mhm,
is realizing that our Western, ideologists have spent a great deal of time creating counter stories to things that have actually happened. And so that's also one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast. Like one of my last guests talked about pellagra, the pellagra pandemic that was a narrative based on something that actually happened in the US.
mhm,
And that was going on since the 1940s,
mhm,
but that was purposefully hidden from the population because it became political and there was a lot of fight to really try to hide it.
mhm,
Um, from the population so that they don't know that this level of irresponsibility was
mhm,
happening, right?
mhm,
That level of politics. Um, and it helped me to see that, our Western culture here and our white culture is intentional about creating counter narratives, um, to counter narratives against whatever is happening. Of course, it's hard to do it now because we're living some of the things that they've tried to create counter narratives for, right? Um, can't really hide much anymore. But yeah, I wanted to point it out because, it's one of the things that has really led me down this road to focusing on what are the histories and the narratives and the histories,
mhm.
that will allow us to see things differently.
I'm
But I
wondering,
notice you're thinking.
I'm wondering if when you're talking about counter narratives and the ways that pellagra was either not talked about or given a different view or a more sanitized view, although it was very unsanitary, or if you're talking about like misinformation or disinformation versus counter narratives. Because my understanding of counter narratives is like there is a narrative about, let's if we could talk about teachers, there are
Uh-huh,
narratives or research about what a teacher is, right? And that
uh-huh,
teacher, if you even if you don't use positionalities to express who the teacher is, that idea would, let's say, for our current state of mind, would be a white woman, right? So
uh-huh,
that is the normalized hegemonic way of thinking about specifically this is what that figure is in all of our minds. A counter narrative would be something that is not that is really trying to another narrative that could also give a different view or share another standpoint or oppositional standpoint to what that white woman teacher's ideologies are, right? So if you
uh-huh,
provide a counter narrative, then you're making sense of how someone else who has a different history, a different worldview, a different way of engaging, how they might experience the same thing or what how their worldview might impact what their teaching is. But
uh-huh,
from what I'm hearing about like pellagra, of course, is a poverty and is a class and race issue. But to talk about the state sanctioned I don't know, just like ignoring of people or just like really not caring about poor folks at all is how something like pellagra is actually able to start and then be maintained for as long as it was maintained.
uh-huh.
Silencing that story to me would be disinformation or misinformation, which is heavily present in the way that our media is allowed to not talk about what's happening in terms of health equity now. So I was wondering
Right.
if you're like talking about counter narratives as like spreading misinformation.
Mhm.
That feels different than what I'm talking about when I talk about counter.
I'm glad you brought that up,
Mhm,
because there are a lot of differences. Oftentimes, when I think of counter narratives as well, I think about narratives that actually replace those narratives. Oftentimes, they are representing some form of symbolism, right? And it'll often be replaced. So, I love this conversation because you're correcting me as well, and allowing me to think of things differently.
mhm,
One of the ways I think about counter narratives too
mhm,
are thinking about the narratives that we may not think that is replacing other narratives. Such as, let me talk about how what good people we are, right? Let me talk about the importance of capitalism
mhm,
and the idealism of capitalism without really focusing on the specifics that are happening within. And I'm guessing you would call that misinformation,
mhm,
right? Just in terms of redirecting and things like that.
mhm,
What I focus on, what I focus on, rather than I don't focus on the labeling of it at all, and
mhm,
that's okay. It's okay to label it, but I focus on um, what are those narratives that people need to understand, in order to change how they frame and change and add to the context they need to get to the truth, right? Because a lot of times people are coming to conclusions
Mhm,
without the particulars that they need
mhm,
to form a a better judgment,
mhm,
right? And oftentimes I feel like one of the reasons I look at it that way is because no matter who we are as well, come to realize that no matter who we are, no matter what race, the way we focus on how we use a framework differs depending on whether or not we focus on the role of symbolism and the importance of symbolism. Because oftentimes we can replace that or use that to influence how much we're willing to go, how far we're willing to go to get to the truth.
I was recently, to your point, reading, I've gotten into Derek Bell's Faces
Mm,
at the Bottom of the Well, and
okay.
I am having the hardest time remembering the name of that first chapter, but Mr. Simple and a fictional character who I believe embodies Derek Bell are trying to have a conversation about racialized symbols and the
Mm,
ways that symbols, of course, have been positioned. Black symbols, folks like Martin Luther King or Malcolm, they have been positioned in order to give false hope or position in order to, um get to this idea of something like myth of meritocracy of like, oh, well, they worked in such a
mm,
way, or they like there's going to be this one leader to come and save you versus
mm-hmm,
there being this collective action, right? And
right.
so those symbols have a purpose. Those
Yep.
symbols can help people who are generationally oppressed, really help them find hope for something. And
Mm-hmm.
also those symbols can be vehicles to silence and to distract and to not
Manipulate.
allow for, yeah, to manipulate in a way that is like, well, if I just do this 1, 2, 3 thing, then I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
finally make it to this mountaintop, not realizing that the mountaintop is a facade, or realizing that the mountaintop is a facade. But now I know that it's a facade. What do I do now? Because I live in this
Right.
terrible place. So where do I go from there? So
Right.
I think there is something to symbols being more than complex, but it being, a way to both propel us, and us for me as Black folks, to help us, like, see where we wanna go, especially when the images that we're given can be so um,
Mm-hmm.
dehumanizing, but
Right.
also can be easily manipulated, especially with the way that our social norms or media productions allow for us to be manipulated in certain ways. But I
Yeah.
think also, something that Black folks have always done is considered our everyday lived experiences, trying to make sense of the power that we do have, the power that we don't have, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes how to survive every day, and sometimes how to thrive in certain systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that there's one answer there about what to do with symbols.
I don't think so either. But I'm fascinated by what I'm finding out about it. I think people have been looking at it for a while. Um, but, I say that to say also, contrary to some of the narratives happening, education is going to be more important than ever now. Especially because there's certain emerging trends that people are trying to make symbolic, that, and in some ways they're a distraction, right? Things that we have a tendency to put things on a pedestal that don't necessarily belong there. And that thing is put on a pedestal so we can focus on it, so we can fixate on it, so that we can ruminate on it. And rather than seeing, maybe there's a big picture somewhere, there's a bigger picture to focus on. But there's one more thing I want to talk to you about. Something that comes up, it's interesting, even though my role as editor and I've always wanted to understand how people are interpreting this, because I'm fascinated by different levels of what I observe as people's critical consciousness. Because everybody's critical consciousness is different, right? And not only are there ideas about it, but how conscious are they? I can pray on each word, right? How critical are you? What does criticality mean to you? and how
Mhm.
conscious are you?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I am curious. What you mentioned that your goal is to view science within this lens of, critical consciousness.
Mhm.
I think I do that, even though it's not a word that I use.
Mhm.
Right? What is that, and how do you? What are your goals with that?
Yeah, let's go to Gloria Lasson Billings. So I was at this Saturday. I'm writing a lit review, and she has this opening to a book chapter book called. Let me get to it, 'cause I think a quote from her could be poignant here, especially in science ed. So the name of the um, foreword or opening is "I used to love science." I used to love science. Dot dot dot, and then I went to school. The challenge of school science in urban schools. And, there's a myriad of reasons why I am a huge fan and fascinated by the writing of Gloria Lasson Billings and her thought process. But I
Mhm,
think she also has done an excellent job of really trying to make what some folks try to make complicated pretty simple. So she talks in terms of K through 12 classrooms. I'll read how she thinks about the function of sociopolitical consciousness or critical consciousness. So she says the third component of culture relevant pedagogy is sociopolitical consciousness. In my mind, this is the so what aspect of schooling. How many
mhm,
times have we heard students ask the question, why do we have to learn this? Only to be told, because someday you're going to need this. We all know how much we all need the periodic chart of elements in our everyday lives. Sociopolitical consciousness helps students understand the way citizens in a democratic society need scientific knowledge to make informed decisions. She talks about an example from a study, and she named the students' major project at the school was investigating a dump site in their neighborhood. The
mhm,
students learned that the site contained toxic materials and ultimately raised questions about the way poor communities of color are vulnerable to environmental racism. The
mhm,
students' passion for this project was fueled by the fact that they understood that they were doing that what they were doing had a payoff for the here and now, not the someday that teachers often promise. So I appreciate that example, and it is what I've always been thinking about when I've been using terms like critical consciousness, which could have to do with like what do students do with this information? How does this allow students to consider what they see every day in their neighborhoods, the impact, the ways that science infiltrates what they see and experience every day, and what they
mhm,
might do with that information. If it's, writing to their legislators who actually impact if they're living in a food desert or not,
mhm,
or the fact that we have dump sites here, or the fact that we have certain corporations um, who sponsor what tech we get access to, but what is that tech actually doing to our larger community
yeah,
versus what we actually need right now, which is maybe resources for either our food systems or resources for our garden or like whatever the students are saying that they would like support with, right?
mhm,
Versus further harming the earth that we inhabit. So
mhm,
I think also Daniel Morales Doyle, I had the pleasure of teaching his book this past semester, which meant I finally got to read his book. And he talks a lot about problem posing education, which of course centers critical consciousness with Paulo Freire, who's also a name that I do not say out loud, but
mhm,
I got that one correct. And thinking about critical consciousness, and there's a myriad of examples of how student interests, of course, are at the crux of it, but then
mhm,
how they might look around their communities or their neighboring communities that come from more privileged areas and ask questions about how did these realities come to be? Who makes the decisions about these realities? What is the
mhm,
function of science and how it is used or misused in our community? And what might we do about that problem?
mm.
So that is critical consciousness in my understanding.
Wow. Thank you, because that was really helpful. That helps me to see, yes, I do use critical consciousness. I wish I had time to read up on a lot of theories, but because I focus on curriculum development, and I think about it critically in terms of let's figure out what you need and why you need it. I'm mostly focused on, so now that I know why you need and what you need it, what type of understanding do I need to create the best phenomenon for you? So then I'll use that predisposition to create that particular phenomenon.
Mhm.
But it definitely is fascinating. It's fascinating just listening to you.
Yeah, I think,
Um,
the other scholar that I was gonna elevate is, of course, Ghodri Muhammad. I think when I was reading her in my doctoral program, her
Mhm.
distinguishing critical, like the capital C critical versus the lowercase critical, I was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
okay, one, blow my mind so I can see it." But also it really helped for like how she was thinking about what criticality is. It's
Mm.
something I was trying to get my students this past semester to try to really consider, and I'm also hearing you say is like, what is the difference between critical thinking and criticality?
Mhm.
When, critical thinking is like, "Oh, I didn't take it as face value." Okay,
Mhm.
yay. We should
Yeah.
take nothing as face value. But what is critical consciousness? Like that is a very different way to it has a completely different end goal, a way of engaging with community, a way of engaging with upending what is
Mhm.
given to us.
Yeah.
And I think that difference is worthy of being elevated.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things I'm also noticing for me, um, is all of these work, because some of them I've looked at, I've attempted to read. And one of the reasons I didn't use a lot of it is because all of my work have implications for them. And I think they're important for people to read, because a lot of times people are grasping at the what should I be doing? How should I be thinking about things? Because I'm already there with a lot of this and my focus is different, I have to figure out what gets me there. And so the knowing what for now doesn't get me there as much. I'll give you an example. Recently creating this curriculum, have this, that I implemented with homeschoolers. And having them, experiencing such an amazing joy to the point where they kept telling us they didn't want us to end, they didn't want us to end. Can we, stuff like that. I knew we got there because of that. But I wouldn't have been able to get there because of using some specific theories. However, the beautiful thing is, and I know I've been criticized for not using as much of our supporting work, but now I can because it's what we've all been talking about. It's what all our predispositions are about. And so I'm excited to, delve into them. I've really started delving into them, and you'll see me using more and more of them because all my work has implications for that. But I want to focus on on the curriculum development aspect. Because I don't think they're not too many of our spaces are focusing on the curriculum development aspect. So what I've started doing is I would create a curriculum, implement it, and then invite some scholars to talk about what happened here,
Mhm.
in a way that we can translate it for our scholarly work.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm appreciating that because I had 2 thoughts as you were talking, and one of them is, like, none of it matters if it doesn't impact the communities we're in service of. Because also what I'm hearing you say is, the goal is that the babies, when they walked away, are feeling like, "Oh, this is something I want to continue and want to pursue more," and that if the work is not impacting them, then none of it matters, and so I was appreciating that, and I was thinking about there we go, historically relevant science pedagogy, which is the frame that I developed while listening to other Black women science teachers. And what you're saying here about curriculum development is why it was super necessary for me to figure out both, like what are the curricular shifts that inhabit
mhm,
critical consciousness, but also what are the ideologies that we bring to the work? Because
right.
nothing matters. That curriculum with that sheet on that paper means nothing to a teacher if you can
Mhm,
have the most conscious, whatever thing on the sheet of paper, but if you don't believe in kids or if you're not considering whatever your pedagogical pursuits are, then that sheet of paper is just a sheet of paper. And it may
absolutely.
also not matter to students if the curriculum does not or the framework does not allow you to break open curriculum in order to hear the 30 kids sitting in front of you. And
Mhm,
what are they interested in and how might you shift that phenomena to really meet their needs or meet their interests. And
mhm,
while still, of course, advancing the big ideas of the discipline. But it
right.
was one of my big ahas of like, if I'm gonna have this arm of my work, which is the innovations piece that is about curriculum, it cannot just be about the curriculum development, meaning the sheet of paper, but also like what are the ideologies that come along with it. And
Absolutely.
Bell Hooks's work, Goldie Muhammad's work, and Gloria Ladson-Billings' work really helped
Mhm,
me put that together. It is so much more than like what we do, but how we do and the intention of it. And I'm hearing that also in what you're saying.
thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm excited about next steps. I'll share with you another time what next steps are. What do you want to? What didn't I ask you that you want to talk about?
Oh, um, mhm, mhm, mhm. Sometimes when I do research with folks and I ask them big questions, or I ask them a whole bunch, I ask them a question like this, I now know what that feels like. Mm,
Oh, good, good.
well,
And usually I ask instead, what do you want to leave the audience with?
I okay, I can answer that. I wanna leave the audience with, I don't know. The babies are waiting for us to have the conversations with them. They are
Mhm,
experiencing injustices every day. They know what they're observing, they know what they're seeing, they wanna know that you see it too and help them along.
mhm,
Um, and so one of the ways that we can support community or a collective gain for us or justice for us is to consider the people around us as we try to make movements, and to not get distracted,
mm.
but to be with community.
Now you reminded me of the question I was gonna ask, and I even wrote it down to make sure I don't forget. Um, but if you wanna add more, that's fine, because the whole goal of this podcast is to understand what do we need, right? What do we need as a population? So, if you think of it in terms of that, what are you thinking? What do we need?
I have an unfortunate question back to you, which is who is we? For you, who is we?
Black people, black children,
Mhm.
um
I think I don't know what we need. We need everything. We deserve everything. I want for us to, Keisha Ray talks about social determinants of health, particularly for Black women.
uh,
How no matter how much money we make, we are dying earlier. We are dying earlier than our white counterparts, which allows us to better understand that systems of oppression are literally killing us. Uh,
mhm,
and that is sure environmental factors, absolutely. And it's literally what this place puts onto our bodies.
mhm,
So what I want for us is to be able to have more, honestly, more offline spaces to decompress and deprogram,
mhm,
to have more communal spaces to sure have these intellectual conversations about what is going on because we need to be able to see, but also to figure out just like what does it mean for us to love in a way that is truthful because
mhm,
some of us are participating in what critical race theorists what might talk about as whiteness as property and like really going for a goal that was never meant for us and only harm us,
mhm,
and to consider, where our imaginations might take us, because what we're fed right now will never be it, or what we've always been fed will never be
mhm.
it. And I think also, like, it's why I look to history. I don't actually believe that this current moment is some particular new grave moment. I think it is with
Nope,
a long understanding of what's always been happening since the
absolutely.
inception of this space. So knowing that allows for the panic to have a purpose, but the purpose
Mhm,
to be chaos, but to also look to what happened before and not the narratives that we were given, but speak to our elders about what was going on in terms of what did it really mean to have social movements versus what we saw on TV.
right,
This
very
is
important.
when did what do we need? We need everything, but we
Mhm,
need each other and we need community and um we need diverse perspectives within our communities to
mhm,
better see all the different vantage points that we could bring to come to our collective elevation. And we need
absolutely.
to read.
What's
And
that?
we need to read, go to the core text. I'm really fascinated by what I read yesterday. It was Derek Bill. Well, I said this already, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, but I read chapter 3. I wish I had the book in front of me, but I left it home so I could
Mhm.
dive in. Um,
We can do this again.
Yeah, I think we need to remember what was lost. Cynthia
Mhm,
Diller will talk to us about remembering what we've learned to forget, who
mhm.
we are, what we've always been. Sorry, I
Yeah.
got distracted in my
No, it's
beautiful
fine.
brain. Um, so I think that we need everything. I don't have an answer for you.
That's fine. Nope,
Yeah.
perfectly fine. I recognize the signs of a thinker. Oh my goodness. I really enjoyed our conversation today. I think,
Great.
yeah, I think we could probably go on and on,
Uh-huh.
especially when you brought up something else, but we'll table that, what
Okay.
whiteness of property is and means.
Okay.
We'll table that for another time because I think we could have a couple hours on that. But, any last thoughts before we end?
Please don't ask me that because I'm gonna keep talking.
Okay, I won't ask you. Well, Dr. Riley, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I thoroughly enjoyed our
Thank you.
conversation.
Wonderful.
And to everyone, if you like this episode, please like it and please subscribe so you can follow and, be alerted when the next episode is posted. Thank you again.
Yay.